My name is Bob Leverich. I'm a faculty member here in Visual and Environmental Arts. I teach sustainable design and sculpture and woodworking. And I'm really pleased today to have, to be the person welcoming Linda Weintraub to campus. And I've been spending time with her yesterday and today, and she'll be visiting programs tomorrow as well. And it's been really fun getting to know her beyond her books. Linda's here under the auspices of the Plato Grant, which is, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a grant funded by software, I believe, developed on campus some years ago. And so I really want to thank Sarah Williams. I don't know that Sarah's here yet, but Sarah took the lead in applying for the Plato funds so that we could use them today for Linda's visit under the auspices of the Making to Ornament program, which Sarah and Arlen Spites and I have been teaching in this year. A root word of the word ornament is ornare, which, among other things, means to honor. And I think it's an appropriate word to start with because I think Linda's work increasingly has become about honoring the environment that we live in. Linda is a graduate of, with an MFA from Rutgers University. She grew up in the School of Hard Knocks in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, sort of like a Hollywood or a Broadway musical. Lots of Puerto Rican girls and black girls in her high school. So she said she learned her street smarts there in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. And she has been a working artist in New York and that environs. She's been a curator. She was curator and director of the Blum Art Institute at Bard College for 10 years, where she had lots of innovative shows and programming. She's an educator. She's been the Henry Luce Professor of Emerging Arts at Oberlin College. She's taught at the New School in New York City and elsewhere and continues to. She's a pretty innovative educator and has designed lots of courses and teaching guides, a number of which I and other faculty at Evergreen have used for teaching environmental arts and thinking about them. As a practitioner, she told me that she decided early that the place to be was on the edge of things, the emerging edge of things. And as people sometimes say, if you're not on the edge, you're probably taking up too much space. And learning, I think, I've learned over the years here at Evergreen, happens on the boundaries between things, between those significant differences that we talk about in our five foci. And it's really interesting having Linda here for me because you get a visitor here who's never been here and you get to see the place through their eyes again. So I feel really honored and privileged, that honor word again, to be here with all of you. And Linda's helps me see once again how special greeners are. And so thanks for coming today. What else do I want to say about Linda? She's a writer. She's written extensively on contemporary art, and increasingly she's written about environmental art and what is increasingly known as eco-art. And she's going to talk more with you about that and how it's distinctive from sort of conventional pictures of art making that many of us start with. And she's taken a tack of, rather than pronouncements, that is sort of saying this is good and this is bad, to provide people with basic information in her writings so that they can make their own decisions about what it is that makes work good and bad. I'd say that she pays attention, and that's what I noticed about her when I first met her, was that she was interested and thereby interesting. And I think that's a good model for all of us, is paying attention, particularly to these thorny issues of the environment that at some level we're all worried about. I think that was pretty evident from a lecture that we had a few weeks ago from Jupong Lin, who talked about beginning presentations with gratitude. So I would like to again express my gratitude to you for being here. And Jupong recommended that we thank the ancestors, the people who were here before us at this place, this evergreen, this landscape, and thank the indigenous people who were here before us, and to thank this environment. And I want to make special thanks to the strawberry arbutus tree out by the casting shed behind the art annex that drops these really beautiful jewel-like leaves every day for me to look at. And I hope that you guys are paying attention to this environment that we have around us that's dropping beauty for us every single day. And I think that is in part what Linda's work is about also, is this kind of awareness, this kind of paying attention. And I want to borrow something from Jupong that I was impressed by when she came. And she had us all rub our hands together. And I'd like you to do that again. And get some energy going for Linda's talk. And she said, "You're not going to do some funky evergreen thing, are you?" So this is it, Linda. We're welcoming you with our energy. Linda Weintraub.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Bob. That was an extensive introduction. I don't have to do anything more. It's great. So I'm doing something brand new in my career today, and that is I'm presenting some material from a book I'm currently writing. It's underway. It's evolving. It's very much in process, which means any kind of comment you can provide to me regarding this material I'll be presenting and the manner in which I'll be presenting it would be greatly appreciated. It means I can do some editing before the book goes to press, rather than wishing I had done it after. So because it's a brand new project, I started thinking about, I think I can trace the beginning of the impulse to write the new book, which is on eco-materialism, to an experience I had in New York a couple of years ago, which I'd like to share with you. It was midday July in New York City. It was one of those searingly hot, you feel like you're going to suffocate kinds of days. I distinctly remember I was wearing a tiny little cotton dress and sandals, and I was standing in the shelter of a bus stop and feeling miserable. I mean, it was just so hot. And I'm looking around, waiting for my bus, and I hear this really, really loud sound. And I traced it to some people, workers who were repairing the street right opposite where I was standing. And these guys had jackhammers, okay? And they're going wah, 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 wah on the pavement, and the dust is flying around, and their bodies are being gyrated. They are standing out exposed in the sunshine so that we had the heat from the sun radiating back from the dark pavement. They had no shelter over their heads, so the sun was shining down on them. They were wearing boots and gloves and hats and protective gear. And I looked at these people, and I remember saying succinctly to myself, "Dear God, they must have the worst job in all the world. And I took a deep breath, and I'm kind of refocusing on things near me, and right over there on the bus shelter was a poster that big. Do you know Mike Rowe? The master of ceremonies of a Discovery Channel program that's called Dirty Jobs. And I thought, this is really a strange coincidence. I'll bet there's going to be jackhammering New York City streets in the middle of a July afternoon on that. And so I took a look, and it was really amazing. There were almost, so you can see he's all blotched up and he's looking really, really messy. And then there are these lines leading off of it. Oops, let me. Sorry, I forgot. Is that still too much?
I'll offer note taking, either one.
Okay, go there. So first of all, there was no jackhammering New York streets, and there was almost no reference to any interaction between the human body and a machine. Instead, most of the jobs that were considered the grossest, the worst, the one that you would least like to have, had to do with interacting with organic matter. So I wrote some down. So here they are. One was as a bat cave scavenger. Okay. Another one was a catfish noodler, a roadkill collector, a pig farmer, a chicken sexer, whatever a microalgae man is, I don't know, but that was one. Honey harvester, avian vomitologist, was that a good one? And the one that really, this is the clincher, they didn't say, oh, it's a compost maker. They called it a worm dung farmer. Okay, so there they were. They're going to emphasize all the grossest of the gross stuff. But it started me thinking about the fact that, heck, here we are, in an era when it seems like we are least inclined, hold on a second, to want to interact with the stuff of life. And that perhaps we feel as a culture, as this popular program indicated, much more comfortable with things that had nothing to do with living processes. And I started thinking about that. And well, living beings, what do? They reproduce, they have sex, they grow, they decay. All of these processes are connected to substances like urine and feces and sweat and vomit and semen. I mean, these are all the materials that seem to be associated with some kind of repugnance and repellence. So there I was, starting to think about the fact, well, this is really interesting. We are, as a culture, inclined to work with one category of material, and that's probably machines and cyber technologies. And so I started thinking about the difference between those substances I just mentioned and those in the category of machines and electronics. And I said, well, those are not smelly, they're not musty, they're not gooey, they don't leave any residue behind. As a matter of fact, we love them, I guess, because they're sterile. They not only have no evidence of life in them, they are designed to thwart life, so they cannot be easily biodegraded, right? So there we are in the middle of an era when it seems like electronic interactions are very popular. So we like simulations, we like models, we like statistics and data mining, and all of these kinds of interactions leave us without any kind of true central interaction with the substances of the world itself. They don't have substance, they don't have texture, they're not bumpy, spongy, furry, slimy, supple, anything of that sort. So anyhow, I began to think, well, how does this affect contemporary art? Because there is always a really close correlation between the issues that are primary in a culture and the way artists create art and choose to express the era through the visual means. So I'm going to be giving some examples based on this introduction, which has to do with how do we as a culture prefer to interact with materials, and what are the cultural implications of these preferences. So I have to say, as Bob mentioned, I typically explore art that's at the cutting edge, that's pioneering, that's exploring brand new ways of making art. It's very exciting at that kind of boundary. That doesn't mean that I think all art must be situated there. So I've begun to think about culture, art, as if it is kind of the human body, where we need some forces that maintain some stability, like our temperature being 98.6. We don't want to deviate too much from that. But in order for the species to remain vital, we need to have free radicals. We need some component of dynamic change out there so that we can adapt to changes as they come along. So I have to tell you, be prepared. You're going to probably be in the company of artists you may find so radical. There are sometimes people tell me, this can't be art at all because it violates so many of the cherished traditional ideas about what art should be. And I hope over time I'll be able to justify some of these violations from the norm. So, I'm going to talk first about an artist. His name is Wim Delvoye, and he took on, as an art project, the issue of where do we as a culture place our faith, and is it always well-founded to place our faith there? And he was observing that we seem to place our faith predominantly in technologies, and we seem to assume that if something is engineered, it's going to be better than if it was something that happened without that intervention. So he created a machine to question our faith in technology and engineering. And the machine that he made has very formal components of all the things that machines are present to us that are pleasing to us, so that it was very refined, it was very elegant, very orderly, very clean. It had a function like machines are supposed to function, so it had inputs, and inputs produced predictable outputs, and it represented our cultural values in that we seem to love the opportunity to control and predict the outcomes of our interventions. Then he gave this machine a particular biological function. So what Wim Delvoye spent 3 years preparing, has been refining ever since, in consultation with chemists and doctors and scientists of all kinds and mechanics and everybody else. He created a machine that digests real food. So what you see up here is the medium. We're talking about materials now, so we're in the new realm of art materials. In this particular work of art, the medium was, this is what the machine was fed: mushroom soup, fillets of salmon, risotto, lemon pudding. Then in order to digest it, the mediums expanded to digestive enzymes, electric pumps, plastic tubing, computer monitors, chemical beakers, thermometers, gauges, compressors, relays, flasks, stirrers, conveyor belt. Yes, it's very long, and that's exactly the point that he was making. So in order for the machine to accomplish what your body accomplishes without you paying any attention to it, without making any particular effort to have good digestion, and that occurs in that little space between your hip bones, required 3 years of effort and a machine that takes about 33 feet down the middle of a huge gallery. Got it? It is really complicated. His machine was fed twice a day. The occasion when I was there to visit it, a chef came in a white jacket and a chef hat, carrying a silver tray, giving the machine its meal. So it went into a kind of food processor type thing, which was the fake mouth, and then it went down a mechanical artificial esophagus, down into the stomach, through the pancreas, and did that whole long travel food through each of the processes of the digestive system. And what happens at the end of the digestive system, right? So we have a machine that is really, really predictable and doing everything just according to an engineered protocol, and it produces the most perfect turds you have ever seen in the world. I got it? And so I hung around, and the machine's churning, and it's doing all this stuff, and you see the stirrers, and you see the temperature dials going, and all this mechanical stuff, and then we all gathered at the end on the conveyor belt, and when the machine produced what it was supposed to produce, everybody cheered. It was completely amazing. Okay, so where are we with all this? Is it ludicrous to spend 3 years, an inordinate amount of money, creating a machine that is doing something that your body does ordinarily without any effort? And it is an artwork, and the artwork is there to have us pay attention. And in this particular case, what the artist was presenting to us is the opportunity to scrutinize the assumption that if something is engineered and done by a machine, it is really good. All right, so there is a quote which I would like to read to you, and this is how Wim Delvoye presents it, okay? So we not only love the machine processes, we love the products of a machine. In this case, the machine produced some shit, and this is what he says about it. He says, machine shit is more pure. It's not shit from a friend or a girlfriend. It's shit from a machine. So it's clean. It's like a Mars bar. When you open it, no one has ever touched it. It has not been tainted by humanity, so people can trust it more. Think about that. Is that wisdom or what? It hasn't been tainted by humanity, so you can trust it more. They, people, you and I, wouldn't eat the shit, but this thought is less disturbing than if we're from any human being, even the one you love the most. Do you think it's true? All right, so, but this has this funny identity, this machine, because it's also art. And so we can think of it as a art-producing machine. And what did the art produce but a lump of shit? So that you will see the attendants with white gloves on, very formally picking up the product of the machine. It is freeze-dried. It is wrapped in very elegant kind of packaging, which I think have, and it is sold as art. And on the package, you will see the particular diet. So what food was ingested by the machine in order to produce this particular remarkable product. Okay, so here is a work you all know, right? And I started thinking about something in relation to what Wim Delvoye did, and came to the conclusion that the materials are very different. Where Wim Delvoye used all these mechanical, chemical, engineered kind of materials, we're back in the world of materiality here. Mark Dion is using trees, bacteria, fungi, insects, plants. Oops, I misspelled lichen. L-I-C-H-E-N. And this piece is installed in a park in Seattle, and I'm told that what Mark did was he took a tree that had fallen some years before. It was 60 feet long and had been decaying for a while, and its decay was giving life to new generations of different forms of life. I'm trying to imagine him transporting this 60-foot-long tree through the streets of Seattle to the park where it came to rest. Inside a greenhouse that was structured specifically for it. So this work of art exists in a frame. Okay, we're talking about art, and it's got a frame, and the frame is an 80-foot long greenhouse, and the idea was for the tree to continue its decomposition, which correlates with the generation of new forms of life. So it's really curious and how much he has in common with Wim Delvoye, in that in order to keep this living process going, it is necessary for this installation to be artificial. So it needs a watering system, it needs temperature controls, it needs humidity, it needs a special wavelength of life, because the conditions it arrived in Seattle City is so much different from the ones the tree had, was its natural habitat in the forest. So we've got, again, a ridiculous investment in perpetuating a natural function that might have better been left at home. I think Mark acknowledges the investment, and he's talking about something that a lot of artists talk about, and that is art is there to make us aware. Sometimes it has to go to very extreme conditions in order to really alert us to something. So there we are in that situation, confronting the way we interact with the natural world and the artificial requirements of perpetuating something that might have been better left alone. Okay, so the poor tree is on life support. Let's put it to rest for a minute and go on to the next part of the talk, where I'm going to be focusing on 3 different categories of materiality. So the first group of artists I'm going to be showing you specifically address the cultural bias against interacting with organic materials, particularly organic waste materials. So this is becoming a very popular medium among contemporary eco-artists. The second group of works I'm going to be showing goes to the opposite extreme, because there are also eco-artists who are interacting with their subject via the intermediary of electronic devices and internet and all of that kind of paraphernalia. So we will take a look at a couple of works of art that utilize digital technologies. And then the third part, I'm going to be presenting, as the artists are showing me, this critique of digital technologies, which occurs when you begin to consider the technologies as material objects in the world and to consider the consequences they have. Okay, so here we go. That's the outside of Mark Dionne's piece. Okay, so Dan Peterman's an interesting Chicago artist who, when he was a student at the Art Institute, had a job right near the university where he was working in a Chicago compost recycling center. And he was there day by day, and he observed how the recycling center acquired the materials it was recycling. Often it came from homeless people who would deposit the plastic bottles and other waste products that they had collected from the streets, and they received a little bit of money in return. At the same time, he realized that because this was really the center of the life-sustaining work of these homeless people, they tended to live nearby, and he would observe them in a vacant lot right near the recycling center, and he noticed that some of them were actually living in abandoned vehicles there. And Dan Peterman started thinking about the life of these homeless people who were eking together a living just by gathering some simple waste, and who suffered so particularly in the frigid Chicago winters. And he began to think, as an artist might, what could he do to alleviate this problem? So one thing he noticed was that there was nearby in this neighborhood a center where the Chicago Mounted Police kept their horses. And of course, we now are into the category of another art medium, because what Dan Peterman did was enlist the horse manure as his art medium. And he thought about a way of solving many of the homeless people's problems by doing the following. So he collected the manure from the mounted police's horses. He mixed it with straw and other decomposing material. He heaped it around an abandoned Volkswagen, which was on the vacant lot where lots and lots of these homeless people tried to find shelter. And you can all anticipate what happens. What happens when the manure begins to decompose and turn into compost? It generates heat. And evidently this experiment worked really well. He talks about sub-zero weather outside, 75 degrees inside. He really carefully redecorated the inside so it had all the accoutrements that would make the people comfortable. Anyone was welcome to go in at any time. And something else happened from all this, and that is at the end of the season, when the compost had matured, he invited the homeless people to have another item of income, or another opportunity for income earning, and they sold the compost to gardeners and the like. The other aspect of this that Peterman is very articulate about is that one of the dangers and the oppressive components of a homeless person's life is that they tend to be badgered by policemen. And he just loved the idea of reversing the relationship. So the horses that belonged to the policemen were serving the needs of the homeless people. Okay, we have now a much maligned critter in the world. Of all the insects you can think of, can you think of any that more people hate than the poor, spiders? What'd you say? Cockroaches, cockroaches, here we go. So her medium is cockroaches. And in each of these cases, I hope you're noticing the fact that it's not just the selection of an unusual medium, but the medium also serves as the theme. It becomes part of the process. The medium plays this massive role. Compare that to a painting that's made with commercially produced acrylic paints, where the medium itself isn't contributing meaning to the final work of art. It tends to be invisible, and all we see when we look at that work of art is what did the artist do to manipulate the medium without paying attention to the materiality itself. But we're in a whole different zone of art making here, where the materiality provides the impetus for the theme as well as the process and the form. So if you go to Catherine Chalmers' studio, what you find are little cages. And in the cages, there are generations of cockroaches that are happily procreating. There's one for the nursery where the babies are being tended. There are those who are aging, and she lets them live out their lives very comfortably in that kind of cage. And she is at the same time addressing this intense desire to kill them. I mean, has anybody ever had a cockroach pet, or do we tend to just indiscriminately and without any conscience use the strongest kind of decimating chemical we can and wipe them out? And so as a theme, Catherine Chalmers began to consider, what is it about the cockroach that makes it such an enemy species in our life? And she says, and it's interesting, listen to this, she says, I can think of few other species that are as thoroughly loathed as the cockroach. Yet the American cockroach doesn't sting, doesn't bite, and doesn't carry dangerous pathogens that flies, mice, and mosquitoes regularly do. So don't you begin to wonder why we hate them so much? Well, the first thing she did was, as an artist, she decided she wanted to show people, confront them with their hatred. So rather than killing them in the usual way, with Raid or some other spray can exterminator, she applied to the cockroach the way humans kill humans. So these are, what you see are these beautiful, really well-crafted photographs of, in this case, a cockroach hanging, a lynching. burning at the stake. Got it? This is an electrocution. Forgive me for not remembering. Is that the last? No, this is gas chamber. Okay, very graphic. Anybody upset yet about what she's doing to the poor little cockroaches? Who? What? Okay, so she says part of the reason she's doing this is that she can anticipate that people are going to be horrified that the poor little cockroaches that they ordinarily squish whenever they have the opportunity to do it are now being executed by an artist, right? But the fact of the matter is not one of them is harmed. She discovered that if you put a very healthy cockroach in the freezer for a while, it slows down their metabolism and everything else. So she can take the little guy out and pose it and do all this sort of thing. She takes the photograph and it will thaw out and resume its life very comfortably. She's got an answer to the question, why do we hate cockroaches so much? And it has all to do with our boundaries, our desire for control, the Wim Delvoye story of we want it to be out of an engineered product rather than something that is not as controllable. So here's what Catherine Chalmers says. She says, our hatred of the cockroach has perhaps grown in proportion to the solidity of the boundaries we have erected between ourselves and the natural world. These animals are one of the few now that can and will cross over and challenge these barriers. I think at a fundamental level, their trespass upsets us and upsets our confidence in our ability to successfully control and transform nature to suit our needs and desires. So these might seem like silly little art projects if you just kind of take a casual look, but each one of them is motivated by a really deep, probing analysis of the contemporary world. Okay, we're on to yet another organic material that might not have been considered part of your required mediums when you took your foundations class or your first art class, and that is Jairam Lee works with urine in this particular work of art. Her medium is produced by her own body, and the message that she is conveying is to reverse the relationship between the human body and the world around it from what has become so much the norm, and that is, what do we need to sustain ourselves? What are the resources we can garner to make ourselves comfortable and healthy? And she began to think of urine as something she can give to the environment because she discovered that urine has the very components of a fine kind of fertilizer. The problem she discovered, because she wanted to grow cabbage with her own urine, is that her urine didn't have these components in the proper proportion. So as part of her studio practice, you know, now we're in the world of the vanguard artist. The vanguard artist in this case practiced art by continually changing her diet until she, and measuring all the components until her body generated the perfect fertilizer for cabbage. So this is what the art installation looked like when she installed this work. And you see this kind of curvy form that is exactly the shape of Jairam Lee's body as she's lying on her side and sleeping. She moved into the gallery for the duration of the show. That ovoid form in the front, I think you recognize as a potty, which she used very regularly to show people that her body was generating a resource and that urine was not a waste product. And as she went along, she was growing cabbage, and on site she transform this cabbage into kimchi, and she offered all the visitors to the gallery the opportunity to, she would share the kimchi that had been fertilized with her urine with anybody who chose to share it with her. What do you think? So can you see these things as literal and metaphoric, as being specific to, okay, what can my body do to the metaphor of what can we as humans do to serve the world, rather than just think in terms of what we take from it that we think we need and often that we don't need but just want. Okay, the last artist I'm going to show you in this category, I'd like you to think of, because I'm going to pair it with the first artist I'm going to show you in the very next category. And if I had been given 5 minutes to do this talk instead of an hour, I probably would have shown these two works side by side because the contrast is so compelling. So this artist is named Wolfgang Gangl, and he is a German artist, and his medium is pollen. One of the things that the last artist in this section of my talk and the first artist in the second section of my talk have in common is that they both are presenting something gorgeous, visually beautiful, okay? What Wolfgang Gangl does is gather pollen, very many different kinds. Here we see him in the field of yellow flowers. Okay. No technology, alone in the field. Does anybody know about how much pollen a single flower creates? Minuscule. So he's going around from flower to flower to flower as if he was a little bumblebee in silence. Think of how slow this process of gathering his medium might be, and how directly, physically, he is to be involved in the process of generating a medium, and how inobtrusive ultimately it would be. And a typical work of art he creates with his pollen would be this. And these pieces resonate with such depth that I can't think of any kind of pigment can have that kind of visual aura and energy and vitality as something that is authentically out of the biological realm. Okay, so let's put to rest all of these weird organic mediums and start talking about technology and electronics as a medium to convey environmental themes. So actually the one, I'm going to back up a second and show you as a comparison to Wolfgang Gangl, a particular work of art by actually an architect whose name is Michael Hansel, who created the following. Another version of gorgeous, completely the opposite. This is totally a product of algorithms and digital media and calculations and electronic kinds of carving techniques. And so here is the piece that he made in a few minutes without any manual interaction with the materials whatsoever. It's interesting to read his comments. So he says, you know, it would have been no easier or no more difficult if I had made a cube as opposed to this very complicated image. So he talks about the fact that because he has this technology at his disposal, he was able to include, he says, this is a quote, hundreds of millions of individual facets that were printed in 3D in a resolution of 1/10 of a millimeter. And the social point here, we're talking about ornament. Bob was talking about exploring ornament, how we're in a whole different realm of ornament here, because according to the architect, he says there is no extra cost for generating this degree of embellishment. So it is no longer a matter of manual skill. This degree of embellishment is no longer for the hierarchy, the wealthiest, the monarchs, and the emperors, but it is now available for absolutely everybody. So it's no longer a luxury. And the other thing he says, which is completely new, is that every unit because of the mathematical basis of this kind of production, can be unique. So this is at the whole different realm of factory modular production of materials, so that every little unit can be individualized, so there need be no more similarity between any two. Okay, so how are artists dealing with technologies? Tiffany Holmes is a really interesting artist in that she is really known for naming and becoming identified with an area of eco-art called eco-visualization. And she talks about the fact that it is so hard for common people to get the sense of the extent and the gravity of environmental problems. And so often those who do the studies, what they generate out of that are statistics. And statistics can be indecipherable to most people and totally overwhelming. So her point is that we don't have a lack of data about the problems in the environment. We have a lack of data communication technologies. We have a lack of conveying the significance of what the data reveals to people. And so this is a typical project that she did. She got permission to create a kiosk in a public atrium, actually on a college campus. And what she decided she would focus on for this project was the energy consumed in real time, minute by minute, within this architectural interior. And so on the kiosk, she created an animation. And the animation was generating real-time data on energy use, but translating that data into imagery that anybody could understand. They don't need to know numbers whatsoever. And where did the data come from? Well, she said, of course people aren't conscious of their contributions to the consumption of energy, because what do? The visual evidence of that is the electrical meter, which is typically hidden in a basement closet somewhere. So if we could get that data right into the public space of people, maybe they would begin to consider the problem of energy consumption and the possibility that they could do something about it. So here is the real data that is being transformed into imagery. And in this case, there's very low use of energy. It's probably the middle of the night. So all of the images that you see are pretty healthy green trees. But as the energy use increases, the green trees begin to disappear, and they are replaced with all kinds of gadgetry that is a plug-in that explains the use of the energy being monitored. In the case of this kiosk, in order to make it graphically really startling, the image, when things are calm, it circulates very, very, very slowly. And as energy use increases, it whirls faster and faster and faster until it becomes a crazy frenzy of imagery. So it would go through transformations kind of like this. Tarik Aakko is a Finnish artist, and so the distressing material subject that she chose to depict, which is different from Tiffany, so I should say, Tiffany Holmes was showing us something that's invisible and giving it a visualization. What Tarik is doing is presenting something that's definitely in the category of yucky, it's gross, and I don't want to go near it. But it is being presented through a different medium, which is a highly technologicalized image. So, Tarik has replaced normal cameras, which are light sensitive, with infrared cameras, which are heat sensitive. And in order to confront us with the decay of a corpse, of a body, of an animal, as it is has just been killed. She documents it in terms of its gradual cooling off. And she has done 5 different animals. She's done a dead horse, a dead calf, a dead cat, a dead bird, and a dead dog. And it's, to me, fascinating that technology has created, out of a rather grisly subject, images that are so very beautiful. So, and you, as the viewer visiting the gallery, can see the video of the cooling off of the dead body, confronting us with a reality, an organic reality a lot of people would, I think, turn away from. These cooling off is fascinating because it doesn't happen equally in all parts of the body at the same time. So the cooling off will happen first at the periphery, and different organs take longer to cool off. So it's a very dramatic kind of visual that she's presenting. And here is the sequence of the calf. And so it seems like technology allows us to take a look at a process that we might want to look away from otherwise. And her point is this, and I quote her, she says, "As we die, the difference between us and our surroundings vanish. We give away energy needed for sustaining life. We lose the coherent form of our body, and finally we become dust. For us, death is a significant point of no return. In physical reality, there is no end point. As we die, we disappear and get organized again. This piece is a delicate reminder that a human community is based on the deaths of other species." Okay, once again, we're in the realm of psychology, we're in the realm of social science, we're in the realm of philosophy in a simple work. I think it's really interesting that she has chosen not to display the piece on the wall. In this particular installation, each of the pieces, which is life-size, is displayed on the ground. You have a whole different relationship between an image, which is on the floor, as one that you observe much more from a distance if it's on the wall. And so what she did was she put the dead body where you'd find a dead body lying in the ground. And she very willingly admits to the fact that she is evoking an emotional response to this death process. So onto the realm of serious humor. Natalie Jenko chose as her medium, through technology, contaminated soil. And technology, oops, has something just happened? Are we okay? Technology has allowed her to interact with this, and the public to interact with this subject, a danger, a contaminated soil, without even touching it in any way. And she did it in a rather amusing manner. So what Natalie did was she worked with a group of students who purchased little toy robot dogs. And then with these engineering students, she changed some of their programming. So rather than sniffing around doing little dances and doing irrelevant things, these particular robot dogs had equipment added to them that could sense chemical contamination. So they became sniffers of the contamination in the dirt. They had added to them microprocessing hardware that enabled them to collect this environmental data. And she also programmed them so that they would perform a kind of pack behavior. So what does she do? She loves working with citizens who happen to live near Superfund sites, particularly those that have been proclaimed safe. And she works with them to create a pack of feral robot dogs. And they're feral because she lets them loose. And little dogs go sniff, 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 until they detect a hot spot and then they all converge and you see them jumping around and wagging their tails and teaching the people who live in these neighborhoods that maybe their environment isn't as safe as they thought it was. Natalie is totally dedicated to making this process available to everybody, and so you can go online. She has all of the means of reprogramming the dogs as open source software, and you can do it yourself. Okay, another way that artists are working with environmentalism through technology is to disseminate information, to hopefully engage the audience in environmental issues, to instruct them, and promote sustainable practices. And Michael Mandelberg is a perfect example of this because he, like Tiffany Holmes, is trying to visualize abstract data. He is even more than Tiffany committed to putting it in the context of people's lives as they're actually making decisions in which their energy consumption is about to be activated. So, as an artist, he has a particular set of skills, and they include knowledge of software tools, data collection, user engagement, simulation, visualization, databases, all the things that are common in the world of digital technology and programming. And he also had a little bit of skill in terms of kind of quietly hacking, because what he did was arrange for a person. They have to first purchase a plugin, but once they do, anytime they go to any of the travel sites like Expedia or Delta Airlines or Orbitz or any of those others, up pops the kind of data that you're seeing right here. Artistically, he's very subversive. He didn't want it to say, oh my God, look, this is Michael's work of art. So all of the graphics kind of look like they come out of that site itself. And what does he include? So just before you click, yes, I'm going to book that flight, up comes information about the carbon dioxide that would be emitted if you took this trip. And then accompanying data, well, how much would be emitted if you didn't take a plane, but you took a car or a train or a bus or a bicycle? And then he gives you data like how many trees would you have to plant in order to convert your share of that CO2 from your flight into a carbon consuming kind of entity. And then he shows you all the other kinds of ways that you can travel and gives you direct links to Greyhound and Amtrak and other alternative means. And of course, very graphically, you are reminded of the ill effects of your travel through the environmental consequences of carbon dioxide buildup. So he gives you the raw data of that. Okay, proceeding on to the third component of my presentation. It's awfully dark here, so I can't see by a show of hands, but might there be anybody here who doesn't have or own some kind of a digital device? Or is this like everybody? Can you show of hands? How many people have faith, believe that electronics represents clean or at least cleaner energy than alternatives to that? And do you use it for that reason? I can't really see what you're saying. Do you think it reduces energy, conserves resources? Does it minimize wastes? Through the artists, I have to say, my aha experiences often come from my artists. I've become really aware of the fact that if you stop thinking of your digital device as an information gathering tool or a convenience or a social media connection or something, and begin to consider it as if it was a material object, think of it as a chunk of dirt and mineral and chemicals, you get a whole different scenario. So briefly, there is just so much to say about this subject. We might consider the fact that to manufacture one computer and one monitor, the following items are consumed. It takes 530 pounds of non-renewable energy, 48 pounds of toxic chemicals, 1.5 tons of water. Not included in that are the costs of packaging and transporting this material, nor does it take into account the effects on the sites where the materials were gathered and mined, nor the fact that we are depleting rare metals from the earth. It took the earth many millions of years to produce these metals, and they will not be replenished. These metals are highly toxic, and they include barium and lead and mercury and many others. So then the question is, all right, here we are, I, like you, own my own digital device, and what happens when we break it? And I would wonder how many of us could fix our own computers or cell phones or iPads? And the other question is, if you could, would you fix it? Or are you more inclined to replace it? And if you are more inclined to replace it, what might you do with the damaged item? As you kind of pursue this line of thinking, it's interesting to contrast, as Wim Delvoye did and Mark Dion did, the world of digital economies and engineered kinds of experiences with those that are organic. And in this case, we might think about, well, what happens to a digital device when it becomes obsolete, when it becomes waste? And there's a whole different scenario than when something which is biodegradable is classified as waste. And what's really particular about this particular category of item is that it doesn't die very often. For the most part, it is determined to be obsolete, and we don't often make any attempt to prolong its life. We actually accelerate its turnover. And the other part is what happens when it's waste. It's not part of the cyclical ecosystem. So we have the earth constantly replenishing itself with those wastes, and growth happens because of decay. When you have linear waste, for the most part, it's really difficult to recycle, and for the most part, that waste is linear. It has a dead end rather than being recycled into the system itself. And if you think about the manufacturers, they make it, I think, intentionally difficult to recycle because they don't let you dismantle it. Dismantling it would be one way you could possibly fix it. And they make it very difficult because even one little computer chip is composed of 60 different elements, which makes it very difficult to separate into its components. And of course, many of those elements are toxic. So, what are artists doing about all of this? Well, they're doing a lot. So the artists I'm going to be showing you are focusing on just one component of the generation of electronic gadgetry, and that is e-waste. And e-waste consists of computers, televisions, VCRs, monitors, cell phones, anything that's connected to the network with wires, lines, routers, and switches. And so here's a statistic that I found staggering. I'll see what you think. In the US alone, 400 million units of consumer electronics are discarded every year. 250 million of these 400 million are still functioning. And the majority of those that are going to be recycled are shipped abroad to countries like India, and they receive only about 15% of the discarded electronic gadgets. Statistically, I'm told 85% end up in landfills. Okay, so let's go back a minute and think of how our world has changed from the way the world was not very long ago. So this is an ad from Radio Shack back in around 1960s, advertising all the different devices that they were offering. This is, excuse me, 1991, not very long ago at all. These are the technological devices you could have purchased in a Radio Shack. You got the whole big list there. Today, in 2015, that all comes in one device called the cell phone. What would it have cost back in the 1990s? Over $5,000. What does it cost now? Over $200. So the people who are commenting on the impact of technology talk about the fact that it is so inexpensive and so convenient that we're probably not going to see fewer technological devices used in the future. Countries where it hasn't been available will be signing in very soon, and more devices are going to be used. The environmental consequences are probably going to be aggravated as well. So Rafael Perez, interesting artist, he decided to take this on in two ways. So on one case, he went to India and observed the recycling of computer gadgets, which is a huge industry among people who are pretty impoverished. They are not organized, they're not part of a union, there's no OSHA to protect their health. And he did a series of photographs of the recycling of the computer gadgets you and I and so many others discard. So this is the hand picking of the discarded materials. Copper coils are broken up by hand. Plastic cases are sold by the kilogram. Extracting chips from mobile phones. Recuperating gold, lead, copper, brass. 300 CD drives dismantled per worker per day. Here's a worker. This is copper extraction. Okay, so here is an artist who has very graphic imagery. And still, he said, there's more that I can do as an artist to not simply record the conditions of recycling, but to manifest them within the context of our cultural values. Here's a solder extractor. So he created a mandala. Does anybody know what a mandala is? A mandala is a form of visual meditation, which is to represent the pure, perfect world among many Eastern religions. And there are many versions of mandalas, and they are exquisitely created among Buddhist monks, Tibetan monks. They're often made out of colored sand. So here we start going into the world of why is the artist doing this? Start thinking in terms of how the artist is thinking of how he, in this case, is going to manifest the theme of waste, all right? As part of the ritual, once the mandala has served its function, it is not preserved. And so the monks will sweep it up and distribute it, usually discarding the grains of sand in a body of water. So here, just think about it. We have something which is pure, something which represents the entire world, something which is treated as a waste product, as an end product, which is returned to water, which is recycled. When Raphael went to India, he said, well, there's a particular kind of mandala in Indian traditions which are really specific to his theme. And that is a mandala which is designed specifically to release the organism from human desires. And so he's in another zone here, which is, all right, maybe what he could do as an artist is have us examine our desires. He did it in the context of the mandala, which is an object of veneration, connecting those two acts. So what do we generate and what do we venerate are the same thing, and that is computer and digital technologies. So the mandala that he made is a huge configuration on the floor, and he created it out of the actual parts that we saw documented in the photographs I showed you. And it becomes an object of not only contemplation and meditation, but certainly consternation, I think, when we begin to see that these are the very, very tangible, getting to the material world, going out of the image into the actuality is going to carry a different kind of emotional resonance. And so you see the actual chips and the actual fragments that the workers were interacting with in the photographs that are part of the installation that he did. All right, Chu Yun's another interesting artist working with the idea of e-waste, a very elegant, beautiful installation. When you first walk into the area, it's absolutely dark, and all you see are these tiny little colored lights, and it looks like a constellation from the sky or some such thing. It's really, really hard until your eyes excuse me, become accustomed to the dark, and you realize that every one of these lights is attached to an electronic device that was gathered up from the waste stream, from a recycling center or from a landfill, that is still functioning. And interestingly, he set it up in a way so that we could almost walk inside and feel like we are home, and confronted the viewer with the fact that this, we own most of these devices, and these little power lights are indications that we are discarding these devices way beyond earlier than their lifespan and their potential use to us. Chris Jordan did a piece called Running the Numbers, and he very much is involved in visualizing statistics, as was Tiffany Holmes. And so when you first see this huge work of art, which if I could find, I could tell you 9 feet by 12 feet or something like that, you get a little closer, and what you find is 5 feet by 8 feet, sorry, I exaggerated, that each of these little units is a cell phone, an image of a cell phone, which he has specifically calculated so that the number of cell phones is exactly the number of phones that are retired in the US every day. And so you would read on the label how many cell phones are retired in the US per day. In this image, you're taking a look at 426,000. And he says, the underlying desire is to emphasize the role of the individual in a society that is increasingly enormous, incomprehensible, and overwhelming. So guys, I think that's it. I thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your comments and see if we can maybe spend a few more minutes together. Okay, thank you. Anybody? Yeah.
Why do you think people have a greater attachment to some objects than others?
I do not have an. Are you talking within electronic world or any object?
Like electronic versus a natural object.
Uh-huh.
Like something made of wood.
Okay. Anybody? Why do you think? If it is true that there is this preference.
I think it varies from person to person.
Yeah.
My response, when you were talking about particularly the way that we throw out electronics before they break, one thought that occurs to me that has occurred to me many times before is that the objects, the tools that I tend to value, that I tend to appreciate the most are things that are built to last. Things like my pocket knife. It wasn't manufactured any. I've got a pocket knife here that was manufactured probably about the same time that my cell phone was,
Which is the other?
So,
The cell phone. Okay, that makes the point. May I ask you all, how many of you own a cell phone that's 3 years old? How many of you own a cell phone that's 4 years old? How many of you own a cell phone that's no more than 2 years old? All right. Anybody 1 year old? Yeah. They are, I mean, I think what you're saying about your knife is so true, but I don't think, or do you think you're talking about a cultural norm? For our belongings, I mean, the whole industry thrive on the fact that we get restless and we're offered enticing opportunities to upgrade and get fashionable and do all that. So from an ecological, ethical point of view, I congratulate you and I wish everybody had your attitude. And I wish manufacturers had your attitude, that if they thought, you know, we would spend $200 for a pair of shoes because it's going to last 5 years rather than $80 for a pair of shoes that's going to only last 1 year, I think they'd begin perhaps to, you know, but it's going to cost more. And I think one of the inducements and enticements is we're manufacturing these pieces of equipment for less and less and less money, yeah.
I think the shoes are an even better example of that because with a cell phone, there's an aspect that we haven't yet. We both have technology that's improving still at a very rapid rate, and I don't think we've yet learned how to make our miniaturized electronics last a lifetime. Whereas shoes, for a really well-made pair of shoes, 5 years is a short lifespan.
One interesting statistic I came upon related to what you're saying is the fact that to manufacture a refrigerator and to manufacture a cell phone is pretty much equivalent, except that the environmental costs of producing the cell phone is much graver because of the kind of thing you're talking about. The refrigerator, we don't turn them over for, what, 10, 12 years. And so the investment in manufacturing is distributed over a much longer period of time. I don't know. Does anybody know the average lifespan? I know how quickly programs and technology upgrades, but I don't know the average lifespan of the piece of equipment people own. But I would bet for the most part it's under 2 years. It has to be. 400 million units discarded? It would have to be that.
Part of it has to do with, like, manufacturers don't like, for cell phones and computers, they don't like updating older models. They won't support it anymore. It could still be functioning, it's just not supported because they don't make any money off of it.
Or the attachments won't work in the newest thing, and it's very inconvenient, and yeah, I encourage you. Yeah.
Also, the processing power doubles every 1 or 2 years. So what was nice 2 years ago is no longer. So there's that turnover rate.
You mean the speed and the efficiency and all that. So we want to get the most, the best. Always, yeah, yeah.
I think that we're not really talking about like the propaganda machine, the consumer machine, the consumption machine that is like kind of embedded in our culture. And it's, I think if we actually look at, like, it might cost more for quality, but if you actually, we're not actually paying for what we buy. Like, if you actually took the amount, like, we did a sustainable breakdown of, you know, the trees, the environment, the workers, if they were paid well, if they had working hours, like, if you took all of that into account we are not paying for, and actually it would probably end up being, you know,
More expensive.
more than what we pay for. So, but we have this false illusion that it's cheaper, and it's actually really not. We're just not seeing what she has in that kiosk.
So one of the people I've been reading compares filling up your car with a tank of gas and how you at least have some visual and sensual acknowledgement of the fact that you are consuming energy because it smells like gasoline and you see the little ticker go up, 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 up as you fill it up. When you turn on your computer, you get no sense that something is being powered out there. It's completely invisible. And the other thing that I mean, this is all new to me. I'm sharing it with you as I learn it. That you can turn on your electric light at home and you turn it off and it's isolated. But when you plug in to get a movie online, things light up all around the globe in order to serve you that movie. So it's not like you are an isolated unit in any way. You are so globally attached that it's continually making demands on a much broader energy generating supply chain than at least I have been aware of before. Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of in a different direction, but I'm interested in the range of work that you showed us. Some of these works really tell us a lot about how to read them. Their point is very direct when you talk about someone who's interested in like giving us a kind of visual access to statistics. Like that tells me a lot more about what I'm supposed to do, whereas some of the pieces, right, like the shit-making machine, right, like seem like they could be read in lots of directions, right, like talking about sort of who we are and what we are and this sort of distinction between the technological and the, right, like sort of philosophical questions. Do you have a kind of range of, I mean, do you find some of these sort of more interesting? Do you think they should be working on multiple levels, or?
Well, the shit-making machine is very interesting because
Yeah.
there are multiple interpretations, and I gave you one that I thought worked well in this context, but other people think it's a way of denigrating art. But I think that's an interesting cultural value because basically when you're working from a mindset of environmentalism and ecology, you don't feel that there's anything denigrating about waste products. They are your research. Your manure is a treasure, you know. People clamor for more of that. So it has to, it reveals as much about the values of the interpreter as the values being presented by the artist. And the artists love that. I mean, they love getting all this different kind of feedback and to feed us the opportunity to have discussions like we're having right now. Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that this was all, that you're presenting on this current project that you're working on. Is this going to be in the shape of a book or some kind of research something, or?
Well, this comes from the beginning of a book, the second half. So the main title is Ecomaterialism. The other part is the word artisan, but put ART/IS/AM. Art is an environmental health clinic. And so the bulk of the book will consist of artists, like 40 or more, bless them, who go and who set the ultimate example of being responsible in terms of an artist gathering mediums. Because that artist is not only minimizing the environmental consequences of the medium, and not only not making work that is neutral, at least doesn't do any harm, but actually is remediating. So Natalie, I showed you Natalie Jenko's work. She's in this in terms of, for instance, she has created as an artwork a particle gathering device with some particle, so that you put it in a flue of a chimney. As the air goes through, the contaminants, the particles in the air accumulate onto a kind of a filter. And she has invented a way of gathering up the contaminants and rolling them in kind of cardboard and creating a pencil. Got it? So this is the ethic and the category of all the artists who will be shown. So my point in writing it, and why am I doing this? Because I want so much to encourage other artists to understand they have the capability of setting the example of really moral behavior and perhaps the kind of behavior that would ultimately save us in terms of a human race. Jairim Lee is like that. How can you use your body to create a resource as opposed to using it? Yeah.
You just spoke about like being a leader, or setting an example for setting the stage of change that we want to see. Do you know any other ways for, putting out the influence other than sitting afoot? Have you found any other?
Other than what?
Have you found any other effective methods for, like bringing the change you want to see?
Yes. Read my book. The last book is called To Life, Eco Art in Pursuit of a Sustainable Planet. There are probably about 40 examples there of artists who are doing exactly that. And they're bringing to the environmental movement extraordinarily fresh perspectives, and they know how to communicate with people, even those, I mean, excuse me, I'm editing myself. That's my problem, because I'm always writing and editing. I do it when I talk too. They create situations where people who have no expectations that they are looking at art, and people who don't know anything at art are often better equipped at getting the message. Because often when something is presented, urine as a work of art, oh my God, and then you find there's a kind of barrier between you. But if you didn't know it was a work of art, and here's an artist making urine that is fertilizer, it opens up everything. So what's so amazing about so many of the artists I'm working with is that they don't care whether the public knows they're in the context of an art experience. They are more committed to conveying some kind of remedial or ethical alternative to what we're currently doing. It's cool, isn't it? It's a whole other way of thinking about being creative as an artist. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it.